My name is Rin Calloway, and I was 31 years old the night my father quietly slid a check across the dinner table to my sister. $55,000. It was for Marissa's down payment on her new house. When I finally asked what my own future might look like, my mother calmly refolded her napkin and said, "You'll figure something out, sweetheart. You always do." She said it with the same casual tone you'd used to tell someone their coffee was ready. That night, my sister walked away with a house. I walked away with a compliment that felt like it had a knife hidden inside it. What I did over the next 2 years? Yeah. My family never saw it coming. And exactly 2 years later, sitting around that same dinner table with the same tablecloth, they asked me for something. That still makes my chest tighten every time I think about it. In my family, money always flowed in one direction, straight toward Marissa. She was 3 years older than me, and trouble followed her everywhere like a shadow. When she totaled her car at 19, my parents bought her another one. When she dropped out of college, they quietly paid off everything she owed. When her credit card debt climbed to $11,000, my mother cashed in a savings bond she'd been holding since her own wedding. Nobody ever sat me down and explained the rules. I learned them the same way you learn a hot stove burns. Money always went to the person who was struggling. And somehow, I never seemed to qualify. So I never got anything. I paid my own way through school to become a physical therapist. I landed a stable job at a rehab clinic. I kept my rent low, drove the same old Corolla, and stayed out of trouble. By the night of that dinner, I had $41,000 quietly sitting in a savings account that nobody in my family even knew existed. In our house, having money you weren't spending was almost considered suspicious. Like leaving your porch light on in broad daylight. They were about to find out exactly why I'd saved every single dollar. That Sunday, Marissa spent nearly 20 straight minutes talking about her brand new house on Larks Lane. For bedrooms, a price tag of $310,000, and a giant kitchen island she somehow managed to mention 3 different times. She was 34 years old. Between jobs again. Something about social media consulting. My father slowly pushed the check across the table. It came straight out of his retirement account. He smiled and said, "You can't really get started these days without a little help." My mother sat there with her hands folded together like she was saying a prayer. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop doing the math in my head. $55,000. That represented years of overtime shifts. Years of skipped vacations. Years of saying, "Nah, I'm good," every time I wanted to spend money on myself. I waited. Honestly, I kept waiting for someone to turn toward me. Eventually, I heard my own voice break the silence. Calm. Steady. "That's wonderful for Marissa. I've actually been thinking about buying a place too. Do you think maybe someday there might be any help for me?" The entire room changed. Not loudly. Just enough. My mother reached over, gently patted my hand twice, and said the sentence that ended up changing everything. "Oh, honey, you'll figure something out. You always do." Marissa laughed. Not in a cruel way. Just easily. Like the idea itself was kind of funny. A few seconds later, someone changed the subject right back to the kitchen island. Underneath that tablecloth, something inside me quietly shut a door. And this time, it locked. Under that tablecloth, something inside me quietly shut a door. And this time, it stayed locked. I drove home that night, grabbed a legal pad, and wrote one number across the top of the page. $41,200. Right underneath it, I listed everything I actually knew. Which, honestly, wasn't much. What I did know was simple. I was done asking anyone sitting at that table for anything. Ever again. A loan officer at a local credit union named Marlene ran my numbers and came back with an approval nearly $30,000 lower than I'd hoped. I looked at her and asked, "Is that even enough to buy anything worth owning?" She shrugged. "Depends," she said. "How picky are you?" That answer stuck with me. So I decided it would be enough. Because I'd make it enough. The breakthrough came at a real estate investors meetup held every second Thursday in the back room of a hardware store. Nothing fancy. Just folding chairs, stale coffee, and people talking about rentals like they were discussing baseball scores. In one corner sat Otis Harrove, 74 years old, 40 years as a landlord. Whenever he spoke, the whole room got quiet. People treated every word like gospel. I introduced myself and told him exactly what I wanted. I'd like to buy a duplex, live on one side and rent out the other. He looked at me the way someone studies a parking meter. Then he said, "Everybody wants to be a landlord. Until a toilet calls M at 2 in the morning." And with that, he walked away. The funny thing was, he never actually said it was a bad idea. He simply told me the price. And prices? Those were something I understood. By June, I'd learned a phrase that completely redirected my future. House hacking. Eventually, I found exactly what I was looking for. A brick duplex on Pimmon Street. It had been sitting on the market for 11 days. One unit already had a tenant. The other needed serious work. Asking price, $139,000. Before I could make an offer, though, I had to survive Marissa's housewarming party. My mother gave tours of the place like she worked at a museum. Every few minutes, she'd run her hand across that kitchen island like it deserved its own introduction. My aunt smiled at me and gently asked, "So, when are you finally going to stop renting?" Before I could answer, my mother raised her glass. "To family taking care of family," she toasted. "That's what we do." I spent the next hour doing what I somehow always ended up doing at family gatherings. Clearing plates. Carrying dishes. Basically working the event while everyone else celebrated. That night, I sat down and ran every number on the duplex again. An FHA loan only required 3.5% down. About $4,900. The occupied unit was already rented to a tenant named Ms. Odessa, who paid $790 a month. My total monthly payment would come out to roughly $1,050. Her rent alone covered most of it. For the first time in my life, a house could practically pay me to live in it. I decided to call my father, not my mother. I asked if he'd walk through the property with me that Saturday. He'd spent 30 years working as an electrician. There was a pause on the line long enough to drive a truck through. Then he finally said, "Sure, kiddo. Saturday, 10 o'clock. His voice actually sounded happy, like a father who'd been waiting for his daughter to ask for his help. Saturday arrived with steady rain. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. It was Dad. Marissa's water heater had burst. Could we take a rain check? I sat in my car outside the duplex for a full minute, just staring through the windshield. Then I grabbed my umbrella and walked inside by myself, because the inspector I'd already hired was standing on the porch. And whether I felt disappointed or not, my money was already being spent. The inspection uncovered outdated electrical wiring that would cost around $6,000 to replace. Instead of panicking, I calmly wrote the seller a letter asking for a $6,000 credit at closing. They came back with $4,000. I answered with one sentence. 6. Or I walk. And I made sure they heard I meant it. They accepted. My father never asked about the property again. Not because he wanted to hurt me. It simply slipped his mind. The same way my goals usually did. By July, everything was approved. I signed nearly 60 pages at the title office. When it was over, the agent placed a small brass key into my hand. I drove straight to Pimmon Street, sat down on the empty living room floor, ate a gas station sandwich, and listened to Ms. Odessa's television playing through the wall. For a second, I thought about calling my mother. Then I played the conversation through my head. Within 90 seconds, she'd somehow turned the topic back to Marissa's furniture. So instead, I looked around the empty room and quietly smiled. It's mine. Those were the only words the house needed to hear. That little brass key became the first one I'd ever earned completely on my own. And my family didn't even know it existed. 19 days after I got the keys. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, Ms. Odessa's toilet backed up. I was standing in her bathroom wearing my rehab clinic scrubs, holding a wrench in one hand. while watching a repair video at half speed on my phone. Somehow, I fixed it. That night became my real education. I patched drywall after finishing 12-hour shifts. I learned that a fresh coat of paint could completely change a room. Honestly, paint became its own kind of love language. I mowed the yard myself using an old push mower I bought at an estate sale. Every dollar I saved went right back into the property. Meanwhile, I kept showing up for Sunday family dinners. And I kept my mouth shut. By September, I decided to test the waters one last time. Right between the salad and the chicken, I casually said, "I've actually been looking into buying rental property." My mother let out a soft laugh. The kind of laugh people give a little kid. Who says they're going to be an astronaut someday? Then she smiled and said, "Honey, the property taxes alone would eat you alive." I simply nodded. Let the conversation drift somewhere else. And quietly promised myself I wouldn't ask again. By October, I bought my second property. It was a small 2-bedroom house that cost $82,000. I ripped out every inch of the old carpet myself. Spent weekends repairing walls. Painted every room. Then rented it to a hospital records clerk for $1.50 a month. A few weeks later, I ran into Marissa at a hardware store. She was loading a huge, expensive grill onto a cart. She swiped a credit card with our mother's name printed across the front. For nearly 10 minutes, she talked excitedly about a house flip she and a guy named Deacon were planning. The whole project was being financed through a home equity loan. She never once stopped to ask why I was standing there covered in drywall dust. Or why my work boots looked like they'd been through a construction site. She just kept talking. By November, while cleaning out the basement of my second property, I found an old oak key rack. It had 4 brass hooks carved with worn floral designs. I mounted it on the kitchen wall. Then I hung my first 2 property keys on the first 2 hooks. The other 2 remained empty. I stood there staring at them for a long moment. Then my mother's words echoed through my head again. "You'll figure something out." I smiled to myself and said out loud, "Watch me." Right there in that empty kitchen, I made a promise. Within 1 year, I'd fill those last 2 hooks. No family money. No handouts. No shortcuts. Just me. I worked 3 12-hour shifts every week. Every spare hour outside work went straight into renovating my second property. The only person who truly saw how hard I was grinding was my coworker, Talia. One afternoon, we were sitting on overturned paint buckets during a break. She looked at me for a long second before asking, "Ren, who are you really trying to prove all this to?" I laughed awkwardly, mumbled something about compound interest. She didn't buy it. She simply let the silence hang there. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. By Thanksgiving, Marissa proudly announced that she and Deacon were officially in business together. They'd borrowed $32,000 against her home's equity to finance their first flip. My mother couldn't have looked prouder. She smiled around the table and said, "Marissa's always had the vision." I sat there, holding the secret of 2 rental properties, 2 mortgages, 2 sets of tenants. And all I said was, "Could somebody pass the potatoes?" When dinner ended and everyone started heading home, my father quietly caught me at the front door. Without saying much, he folded $40 into my hand. Small enough that no one else noticed. "Gas money," he whispered. "Don't tell your mother." I never spent that $40. I still have it today. The following spring, I refinanced my second property. Pulled out roughly $22,000 in equity. Every penny became the down payment on property number 3, a house located just a few blocks from a hospital shuttle stop. Not long after that, my phone rang. It was Otis Harrove. He asked if I wanted to buy one of his duplexes. He'd owned it since 1961, and instead of sending me to a bank, he was willing to finance the deal himself. I couldn't help asking, "Why me?" He answered without missing a beat. "It ain't a gift, kid. It's a note." Then he added something I'll never forget. "Because you fix your own toilets." Before agreeing to anything, Otis wanted to inspect every financial record I'd kept. Every receipt. Every payment. every notebook. He sat there reading through my paperwork for nearly 2 hours. Finally, he tapped the very first legal pad I'd written $41,200 on with his thumbnail. He didn't smile. Didn't congratulate me. Didn't give some big emotional speech. He simply stood up and said, "Tuesday. My attorney's office. Bring the down payment." That was all. And somehow, it meant everything. Part 5, rewritten. My mother showed up 3 days before the family meeting. She arrived carrying a coffee cake. Like we were just two people catching up over breakfast. She stood quietly in my kitchen, her eyes drifting toward the old oak key rack. For brass hooks. For property keys. She stared at them for a long moment before finally speaking. Then she told me a story I'd never heard before. In all my 33 years, she'd never mentioned it. When she was growing up, her father's farm had gone entirely to her brother. Not because he'd earned it, because he'd failed at everything else. "That's just how things were done," she said softly. Then she looked at me. I was told I'd figure something out. She forced a small smile. And I did. After a pause, she added, "That wasn't favoritism, Ren. That was triage." She snapped her purse shut, leaned over, kissed my cheek, and headed for the door. Just before leaving, she turned around one last time. "Sunday," she said. "Marissa's drowning. Bring your checkbook." Sunday arrived. Same dining room. Same tablecloth. Same seats around the table. Only this time, my father didn't slide a check across to Marissa. He slid a folder toward me. Inside was a refinance proposal. The plan would roll Marissa's home equity loan back into her mortgage. The bank had already approved everything. Except for one thing. They needed a cosigner with stronger credit. A yellow signature line waited at the bottom of the page. My mother looked at me with eyes full of certainty. "It won't cost you anything," she said. "You always wanted to be part of this family." Then she smiled. "Honey, this is your moment." Before answering, I turned toward Marissa. My voice stayed calm, professional, almost like I was checking a patient's vitals. I asked her every financial detail out loud. Income, debt, monthly payments, expenses. On paper, I could absolutely survive signing that loan. That much was true. I could have purchased their approval with one signature. Right then. For the price of a single pen stroke. I picked up the pen, held it for a second, then calmly placed it back on the far side of the folder. No. The room froze. I looked directly at my sister. "I'm not signing. And I'm not writing a check either." Then I held up one hand. "But hear me out." I turned fully toward Marissa. "Here's what I will do, if you're willing. Every Sunday, you and me, my kitchen table. We'll build a real budget based on your actual income. We'll list your house and sell it for what it's honestly worth. When it closes, you'll walk away debt-free." I paused, then continued. "And this summer, when my second rental becomes available, you can apply just like anybody else. First month's rent. Security deposit. My standard lease." I looked her straight in the eye. "You'll be my tenant. Not my charity." My mother shot up from her chair. So fast it scraped loudly across the hardwood floor. "She's your sister," she snapped. "Not some applicant." She grabbed the folder and shook it in frustration. "We fed you. We raised you. And the one time this family asks you for help." She slammed the papers onto the table. "You hand your own sister paperwork?" Then she pointed a finger at me. "You've got 4 houses. 4. And your own sister is drowning." I slowly stood too. My voice never got louder. "You're right, Mom. I do have 4 houses." I let the silence settle before finishing. "And you never had to worry about me." I nodded once. "I know you meant that as a compliment." Then I met her eyes. "So, let me return one. I'm fine." I made sure of that myself. Because somebody sitting at this table had to. The room went completely still. No one had another word. I quietly picked up my coat, walked to the front door, and left. Outside, the cold air hit my face. A few seconds later, I heard the front door open behind me. My father stepped onto the porch. No hat, no jacket, just standing there in the cold. After a long silence, he finally said, "Send Marissa the Sunday Time." That was it. From him, it was almost everything. That summer, Marissa sold the house. It went for just a little more than what she still owed. For the first time in her life, she walked away from something with a little cash in her pocket and absolutely no debt. The flip she'd started with Deacon ended up selling for less than they owed. When everything was settled, her share came to exactly nothing. That fall, she landed a steady management job. Nothing flashy, just honest, dependable work. A few weeks later, she filled out the rental application for my second property. Every answer was truthful. Every number was accurate. I made her wait 2 full days before giving her my decision. Talia still says that was petty. And you know what? She's absolutely right. I regret exactly none of it. For months after moving in, Marissa had paid every single rent check early. Not once, not twice, every single month. My mother, on the other hand, hasn't stepped foot on Pimmon Street since the day she brought over that coffee cake. We still see each other, usually at someone else's birthday, holiday dinner, or family gathering. We're polite, friendly enough. But if I'm being real, we talk like former coworkers who happened to know each other once. Then, one afternoon in August, a small card arrived in my mailbox. Inside were only 2 words. "Love, Mom." That was it. No apology. No explanation. No long letter trying to rewrite history. Just those 2 words. I've stopped expecting anything more. Because now I understand whose kitchen she learned that silence in. Every once in a while, Otis Harrove mails me a postcard. No greeting. No signature. Usually just 1 sentence. The last one simply said, "Books still clean." They are. Last Sunday morning, Marissa's pickup pulled into my driveway a little earlier than usual. She climbed out carrying coffee in one hand and a box of pastries in the other. She looked up toward the porch where I was standing and grinned. "Hey," she called. "You home?" I smiled. Then I looked through the kitchen window. The old oak key rack was hanging exactly where it always had. For brass hooks. For property keys. And hanging beside them, one ordinary car key. It had somehow earned its place among the others. I honestly don't think it even knew how. I looked back at my sister. Then I smiled and asked the only question that still felt right. "Which one?" She laughed, climbed the porch steps, and together, we walked inside to do the work. After everything that happened, there's only one thing I know for sure. Being the one who figures something out was never the consolation prize my family believed it was. It became the greatest inheritance I could ever give myself. One decision, one property, one key at a time. No one gets to slide that kind of future across a table. And no one gets to take it away.